Good evening. Hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing good. We're back for another reading, and I thought tonight, we are going to have a little look at the subject of the Epstein emails because it's really funny that this is sort of being slowly released into the news sphere. And obviously it's very relevant to what we've been talking about in previous episodes. Well, I've been talking about it. We have been talking about it. And I know my narrating can be a little bit I don't always flow the best with it, but I'm really not used to talking about this stuff. So I do the best that I can. But I just find it really interesting that they brought Virginia Giuffre's name into it. And I'm like, okay, we've just read the book. We're not even finished reading the book yet. We know what she said in the book. We know that she's implicated certain people as kind of setting her up to be in this public role as the victim. So now the fact that she very tragically is no longer here, they're using her name in vain. It just really gets your goat. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, yeah, who's going to speak for her now? Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I just wanted to sort of quickly mention the fact that her name was brought up as a victim. Well, sorry, Trump's name was brought up in Jeffrey Epstein's emails. Now, to start off with, there's apparently like 20,000 emails or something, and it's like, I don't know who's got time to read all of that. I don't know how they've been suddenly accessed now, but do you know what I mean? You always feel like, well, something's going on here. Not quite sure what, but it just feels like another part of the general psyop vibes that our whole world is about. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of go over the bit that that spoke about Trump and Virginia Giuffre. So, and also, yeah, I wanted to sort of say about this guy, Michael Wolff. I mean, I just feel like, ugh, really? You've been sitting on this information for all these years and emailing Epstein when he was in prison and sort of like buttering up to him. It's just, ugh, I don't know. It's just another example of if the guy had ever been held properly to justice, to accountability, we wouldn't have this sleazy spin-off of journalists trying to cash in on it. But anyway, there appears to be some sort of conversation which implies that Epstein had information on Trump and Trump had information on Epstein. And when this conversation turned towards Trump, very, very quickly, Epstein got arrested. That's what I'm making of it. But what I did notice is when we were reading the book, is that I even made a joke about how Virginia Giuffre was, I wouldn't say a fan of Trump, but she's definitely not said anything negative towards him. She actually said that her father introduced her to him when they were working there, and he was proud of her. And I got the feeling that that was a proud moment for her. I made the joke that the book was almost doing a bit of a PR job for him. Like, it definitely felt to me like she was trying to stay on side with him. So for them to, or for the White House, I need to read from an article from NBC News, because otherwise I might not be making sense. So let me just read this little excerpt. So, in an email to writer Michael Wolff, who interviewed Epstein numerous times for a book he was working on about Trump, Epstein denied Trump's account of having stripped him of his membership at the Mar-a-Lago club for being a creep. I mean, that doesn't really surprise me at all, because the fact is that her dad, according to her, was a pedophile, and he worked at that club. And I mean, clearly no one cared about that. And clearly Ghislaine was operating, recruiting people from there for years and years and years. And there's no way they didn't know about it. So Trump said he asked me to resign, never remember ever, Epstein wrote. Again, that doesn't surprise me, because he just seems like the type of guy that would be like, I'm not filling out a form. Of course he knew about the girls, as he asked Ghislaine to stop. The email continued, referring to his former girlfriend and accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell, who recruited at least one of Epstein's victims, Virginia Giuffre, at the club. In another email that was sent to Wolff, Epstein said a woman whose name was redacted worked at Mar-a-Lago. Trump knew of it and came to my house many times during that period. The testimony of the houseman, John Alessi, confirmed it. He never got a massage. In an email sent to Maxwell in 2011, Epstein and Trump spent hours with someone the committee says was a victim. Maxwell is a convicted trafficker currently serving a 20-year prison sentence on charges that included conspiring to trafficking minors in connection with Epstein. Well, we all know that she was just vindictive and assaulted Virginia Giuffre in her own words, so God only knows what she did to everyone. I want you to realise that that dog hasn't barked. The dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Victim, spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned, Epstein wrote. And Maxwell replied, I have been thinking about that. The White House and Republicans on the House Oversight Committee said on Wednesday that Giuffre's name was the one redacted in those emails. Giuffre, who died by killing herself this year, did not accuse Trump of any wrongdoing. So that was the little thing from the news article, which I agree. She did not accuse him of any wrongdoing. And like I said, the narrative to me seemed kind of like she wanted to stay in favor with him. And just to say as well, like, she did say about there was an ex-president, but I think that was referring to the Israel guy. How would it have benefited her to not name him, or to not tell someone? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I then looked up that in her deposition. Okay, so we were talking about Sharon Churcher, the journalist who wrote the art, who broke the story that she was a victim and published the picture of her with formerly Prince Andrew, and then sort of suggested that she write a book, and how Sharon Churcher suggested that one of the men she was trafficked to was Alan Dershowitz, who, by the way, was one of Trump's lawyers. So, yeah, it is all starting to look very, very sus. But I looked up in a partial transcript of a confidential video deposition unsealed today. So this was in 2019. So this was long before she was committed to writing her book. This was when wait, what was this for? Oh, it was part of her lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell. It was actually made in 2016, sorry. I guess it was released in 2019, but she made the deposition in 2016 as part of Guiffre's lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell, whom she accused of grooming her to serve as an underage, you know what. So, she said that the previous news reports by journalist Sharon Churcher detailing her interactions with now President Donald Trump were not true. She said that in a deposition in 2016. And this article was published in 2019. During the newly unsealed deposition, attorneys asked Guiffre whether statements printed about her or attributed to her in Church's work were true. It's true that he didn't partake in any sex with us, Guiffre said of Trump. It's not true that he flirted with me. Donald Trump never flirted with me. When asked again later if Trump had indeed flirted with her, Guiffre said he didn't, that's inaccurate. Guiffre was also asked about this statement attributed to her regarding Trump. He'd laugh and tell Jeffrey, "You've got the life." I never said that, Guiffre explained in the deposition. I didn't physically see Trump sleep with any of the girls, so I can't say who he had sex with in his whole life or not. But I just know it wasn't with me when I was with other girls, she went on to say. I worked for Donald Trump and I've met him probably a few times, she said further. Guiffre said she worked at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort and said her father spoke to Trump when Trump was at the facility. Well, yeah, we went over that in the book. Questions about Trump's activities there with Epstein have been circulating for some time and were recently renewed by the release of a video purportedly showing Trump and Epstein partying together now in the White House. Trump has downplayed any connection to Epstein, saying he and Epstein did have a falling out a long time ago. I haven't spoken to him in probably 15 years or more, Trump added that he wasn't a big fan of Jeffrey Epstein and had no idea Epstein was engaging in criminal acts. Trump's critics, however, have pointed to an October 2002 New York Magazine interview where Trump said this: "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life." That was probably the worst Trump accent ever. But again, it says, Giuffre said she never saw Trump and Epstein together. She did, however, say that Epstein claimed to be a good friend of Trump's. The accuser was also pressed on whether she ever saw Trump at Epstein's various homes and properties. "Did you ever see Donald Trump at Jeffrey's home?" she was asked. "No, not that I can remember." "On his island?" "No, not that I can remember." "In New Mexico?" "No, not that I can remember." "In New York?" Not that I can remember." When asked about a statement that she spent 4 years as a millionaire's personal masseuse, Giuffre referenced a Mar-a-Lago timeline that she only acted as such for 2.5 years. It has been previously reported that Giuffre worked at Mar-a-Lago as a locker room attendant before she says Maxwell recruited her to work as a masseuse for Epstein. In the deposition, Giuffre disagreed with reporter Church's reference to herself as a pedophile's dream. "I said something along the line like, the pedos loved me because I would do everything that they wanted for them," Giuffre said in the deposition. "But do I think that? Yeah, I know Churcher made that line up herself. The pedophile's dream." In the deposition, Giuffre also references interactions involving Bill Clinton and also says she met Al Gore, Heidi Klum, and Naomi Campbell through Epstein and/or Maxwell. Some pages of the deposition are missing, so some of the contents are difficult to put in complete context. The unsealed deposition was part of a defamation lawsuit Giuffre filed against Maxwell in 2015. Oh, it's 2015 now. Okay, so she filed it in 2015. She took the deposition in 2016, and this article was published in 2019. So I just thought, I don't hear in these reports about these Epstein emails, I don't hear anyone citing this. So I thought I'd do it because I don't know. I'm actually starting to question myself. But I think that Trump lies, Epstein lies, Ghislaine Maxwell lies, Churchill lies, Dershowitz lies. So what are we left with? We're left with Virginia Giuffre, who by all accounts has really opened up about so many events in her life. It just seems unlikely that she wouldn't have been honest in her deposition, although she did say, "I don't recall," but still. Okay, so I then came across another article because then I was like, I want to get to the bottom of her and Dershowitz suing each other. So I found another article where it says that Epstein victim settles civil suit against attorney Alan Dershowitz. So this is from Courthouse News Service. So I'm taking it as an unbiased report. And it's November 8th, 2022. And it says, that Virginia Giuffre has recanted her long-standing allegation that Harvard law professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz was one of the men whom pedophile financier Jeffrey Epstein forced her to sleep with. I have long believed that I was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to Alan Dershowitz. However, I was very young at the time. It was a very stressful and traumatic environment. And Mr. Dershowitz has from the beginning consistently denied these allegations, Giuffre wrote in a statement. This litigation has been very stressful and burdensome for me and my family, and we believe it is time to bring it to an end and move on with our lives. The letter is part of a 3-page notice of voluntary dismissal made public Tuesday afternoon, which states that Giuffre and Dershowitz have agreed that her 2019 defamation suit shall be dismissed with prejudice and without costs or award of fees to either party. In a joint statement on Tuesday, the parties claim the resolution does not involve the payment of any money by anyone or anything else. Back in 2008, Dershowitz's efforts had been key to helping Epstein negotiate a guilty plea to state sex charges in place of the more serious federal charges hanging over him. He was 84 in 2022, so he's 87 now, has always denied ever having sex with Giuffre and brought counterclaims against her suit, which depicted her allegations as part of an elaborate plot. See, this is the bit that had me, yeah? Wait for it. Depicted her allegations as part of an elaborate plot to extort money from billionaire Lex Wexner, the Victoria's Secret retail tycoon whose fortune Epstein managed. Giuffre, now 39, said she now recognizes, I may have made a mistake in identifying Mr. Dershowitz. She resides in Western Australia and is founder of the non-profit Speak Out Reclaim, SOAR, helping trafficking victims. During pre-trial proceedings, Dershowitz often referenced the existence of a recording in which Giuffre's lawyer, David Boies, stated that he did not believe she had slept with Dershowitz. He also publicly declared the villain here is David Boies, who is exploiting a crazy woman in order to get revenge against me. Dershowitz commended Giuffre on Tuesday for admitting her mistake and walked back his accusations against her prominent New York attorney. I now believe that my allegations that David Boies engaged in an extortion plot and in suborning perjury were mistaken, Dershowitz said in a statement. So yeah, he then goes on to, that was in 2022. So he had already lobbied for what's her name, Ghislaine Maxwell, to be pardoned, which didn't happen. And he's been an attorney for Donald Trump. But you know what else I found out today? Don't worry, I'm going to get onto the book. I'm going to get into the reading the book very, very soon. I just wanted to give all of this information because I think it adds a lot of context. He, in the 1970s, represented a porn star. As a Harvard law professor. So I just thought that was very interesting. Because the argument he used was that the guy shouldn't be charged for making such a movie because it violates his freedom of speech. So I just find it very hard to believe that Alan Dershowitz, although he uses in his excuse as well that he never did anything untoward because his wife was there. I mean, the oldest excuse in the book, yeah. But he's representing a porn star in the 1970s. He gets O.J. Simpson off. Not single-handedly, but he was O.J. Simpson's attorney. And we know that one of the key witnesses in that trial made an interview with a news station and was then disqualified as a witness for making an interview, which is, I mean, that's how they won. So Dershowitz knows that. Do you know what I mean? And yeah, then he's like listed in the flight logs on Epstein's plane. He's clearly around all these people, and I'm like, I just can't believe that he's innocent, is what I'm trying to say. So these are all just little bits of info that I've been coming across. And yeah, it's just really crazy how when you hear something now, like if I hadn't read this book, if I hadn't have looked into this guy, I would just be hearing about these emails and I would just be believing what I was being told. But because I have done a little bit of background research, I know they're lying. Let's see what we've got in the chat. Can you slander a victim posthumously? Are there laws in place in the UK? Well, it's funny you should say that because I made a video about Michael Jackson, because that's another case that I take a lot of interest in, is the Michael Jackson case. Because if you notice, the same commentators that believe that promote that Michael Jackson is innocent are the same ones that will say that Virginia Giuffre was killed off. They don't acknowledge that she was abused by her father. They will take up for people like Justin Baldoni and Johnny Depp and who's the other one? My mind's gone blank. There's so many, but you know what I mean. They will take the abuser's side. And they will use these same arguments about freedom of speech and women are crazy, which undermines the Me Too movement. And by the way, another little thing I found today, because I knew this as well, but I just needed to have it confirmed. Alan Dershowitz wrote a book in 2019, which he said will counter the Me Too movement. I knew he was lobbying against the Me Too movement, but I forgot he'd written a book about it. So yeah, that's who we're dealing with here. But yeah, going back to the Michael Jackson thing. So Michael Jackson's lawyer, one of them was Mark Garagos, by the way, who was also Stormy Daniels' lawyer, who obviously sued Donald Trump. But yeah, then he had the white-haired guy whose name escapes me, but anyway, he was one of them. But then there was another guy called John Branca. He's been with him for ages, and John Branca works, I think, with Garagos and Brian Friedman on the Michael Jackson estate. Like, they're still involved. But John Branca has been lobbying to have defamation against dead people made illegal. So, for example, these allegations against Michael Jackson, with him now no longer being alive, John Branker wants that to be not possible. So, I mean, if anything, this is more reason why, because I know the other day I was like, well, do we really need the Epstein files? But now I'm like, yeah, we do. I'm literally sitting here thinking, like, we are just sat in such corruption and lack of transparency, and it's just like every day is a new distraction to try and get away from the elephant in the room. And it's like, yeah, I think that they are defaming her, but someone should be allowed to show that's not true, basically, is what I'm trying to say, instead of just like bringing in more legislation to shut people up. Do I think the Epstein files have video footage? It has to. It has to. They confiscated so many tapes, and everyone has said there was cameras in every room. If you look at the footage that was taken when they raided the Brillo Way house, you can see all the computers set up. And that was in 2008. So not that many people had computers then. Do you know what I mean? So they have to have tape. They have to have so many. And then remember, she said there was that room with all the photos and everything in it. So, and we're talking about not just him, but like powerful men from all different countries, you know, that were in these compromised situations. So I absolutely think that there was videos and evidence of all of it, but I guess it's just such a mess that it would literally probably break the whole world. It would just literally it would literally show that there is no democracy. Like, anyone that thinks that we're living in democracy is kidding themselves. That's what I think. Anyway, I think that's enough for today's little ramble. I am now going to carry on with the book. So we're on chapter 26. Let me take a little sip of water. Got my hoodie on today. I couldn't be bothered. I just want to say once again, I am so grateful to Virginia Giuffre for writing this book. It couldn't have come out at a better time. I don't know whether it's a coincidence that the book came out and now it's made people think, well, I'm going to go ahead with my stuff now. But if only they had done it at a more appropriate time. But I guess it is what it is. Okay, so we're on chapter 26, Rocky Mountain High. There's a Kelly Clarkson song that she recorded around this time. And whenever I hear it, I think of how I felt leaving Florida. In Piece by Piece, Clarkson describes recovering from wounds her dad inflicted in childhood by finding a sustaining love as an adult with a kind, protective husband. Piece by piece, he filled the holes that you burned in me at 6 years old. She sings fiercely to her father. Wow, I don't even know that song. And I think of Robbie, who restored my faith in family by building a new one with me. And of course, I think of the man who burned me, my dad. So, yeah, just to recap for anyone who wasn't on the last, who didn't hear the last reading, she found out that her dad had been paid by Epstein to keep quiet about what he was up to because obviously he was dropping her off to his house when she was still a teenager. So it's pretty obvious what was going on. But yeah, she then confronted him about it and he didn't deny it. So that kind of caused a huge argument in the whole family. And she told her brothers because she was scared that he was going to molest their daughters. Of course, as I keep saying, this guy, her dad, is still allowed a platform with people like Piers Morgan. And where else has he been? I think he goes on Fox News. You've really got to like watch out for these Pred supporters because they're everywhere. At 31 years old, I'd been fighting most of my life to feel like a worthwhile person. I'd made strides, no doubt, but sometimes all that healing seemed to disappear. At those moments, I felt like a house in a pounding hurricane whose breakaway walls float away when the storm surge gets too deep. Sure, by design, such destruction may help the house survive, but there's still damage, and until it's repaired, the house is a mess. That was me for a while after we got on the road to Colorado, an unhappy mess. It didn't help that the minivan we were driving was full to bursting with both people and animals. In addition to Robbie, Alex, Tyler, Ellie, and me, we were also transporting several Chinese fighting fish, 3 ferrets, a cat, 3 dogs, Bear Champ and Odie, an utterly insane Jack Russell Terrier we'd adopted in Florida, a snake named Athena, and I don't even know how many hamsters. What I do know is that our first night on the road, once we'd found a cheap motel to sleep in, we left the fish and the hamsters out in the minivan. The fish froze to death, and the hamsters got loose, never to be seen again. Now we were heading into unknown territory, both geographically and physically. Mom and I had been in more frequent touch, but I hadn't seen her in person for years. I knew she wanted me to flourish, and of course, I wanted the same for her. When she'd married again, I hadn't attended, but I told her I was happy for her, and I meant it. Whenever I'd brought up anything about abuse I'd experienced, she would tell me she just couldn't bear to talk about the past. For months now, I'd been trying to accept that if I wanted a loving relationship with my mother, I'd just have to take her as she was. My mom and her husband, Stan, lived in a mobile home in Penrose, a farming and ranching community in Fremont County. So rural that it's categorized not as a town, but as a census-designated place and post office. With our house sitting unsold in Florida, we were in no position to buy a home. Besides, we weren't feeling like making any long-term commitments. Instead, we found a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house to rent just 2 miles away from my mom. I was determined to make a go of getting to know her again. Robbie and I found a great school for the kids, which looking back was perfectly timed. While I'd loved playing teacher, the kids were missing the camaraderie of having other kids around. And I was getting too busy for homeschooling, spending more time with Brad Edwards and Brittany Henderson, whom I'd asked to help me create a non-profit organization to help survivors of sexual trafficking and abuse surmount the shame, silence, and intimidation that victims typically experience. I wasn't sure exactly what my organization would accomplish, but in December 2014, Brad and Brittany helped me file the paperwork to formally get Victims Refuse Silence, as I then called it, registered as a 501c3. So why don't I just genuinely believe that she really wanted to make a go of this organization, unlike a lot of other people that have non-profit organizations that shall remain nameless. That same month, Brad and a colleague, former federal judge Paul Castle, put the finishing touches on the motion that sought for me and another victim to join the lawsuit that Courtney Wild had filed against the US Attorney's Office back in 2008. As I've said, that suit alleged that the government had failed to protect the rights of Epstein's victims guaranteed by the CVRA, the right to confer, to have reasonable notice, and to be treated with fairness. In response, the government had argued that those rights did not apply to Wild because no federal charges had ever been filed against Epstein. But why not? Oh yeah, that Acosta guy, who was then given a government role by Donald Trump. Wow. But the judge in the case rejected that position, which cleared the way for Brad to try to get me and the other victim attached to the case. Brad knew he had to be careful. It's like chess, not checkers. He didn't want the judge to think he was unnecessarily expanding the lawsuit's scope, but he felt it was important to show there were different kinds of victims who'd been impacted. The other woman he was seeking to add, Jane Doe 4, was one of a dozen or so women whom Brad had identified as victims of Epstein's underage sex abuse, but whose existence the government had never formally acknowledged. That was because the government had stopped investigating when it entered into the broad immunity agreement for Epstein that we found so abhorrent. In the wake of that, Brad had pushed the US Attorney's Office to consider these unnamed women as opportunities to go after Epstein again. As Brad wrote in his book, because the government, having stopped its investigation, did not know that their identities at the time the non-prosecution agreement was signed, there could not possibly be any restriction against filing a new indictment against Epstein for those newly discovered crimes committed against these newly discovered victims. Right? Wrong. Despite Brad's urging, no new charges had been brought. That was why he wanted Jane Doe 4 attached to his suit. He wanted me attached, meanwhile, because unlike the case's original petitioners, who were abused only in Palm Beach, I'd travelled the world with Epstein and had been lent out to several prominent men, some of whom Brad was planning to name. I would be kept anonymous, he said, and referred to as Jane Doe 3. Brad decided we would file our motion for joinder, as it's called, the day before New Year's Eve, 2014. He hoped the filing would go unnoticed given the holiday, and perhaps it would have, but for Josh Gerstein of Politico. Oh. On December 31, Gerstein blogged about the filing in general, but mostly about me. A woman allegedly kept as a sex slave by politically connected billionaire investor Jeffrey Epstein, who went to jail for having with underage girls, is accusing several prominent friends of the financier of having taken part in the debauchery. According to a new court filing, Gerstein wrote, the woman, referred to in court papers as Jane Doe 3, levelled the allegations Tuesday. Imagine he's writing this on New Year's Eve. Gerstein's story went to quote this part of our filing. Epstein trafficked Jane Doe 3 for sexual purposes to many other powerful men, including numerous prominent American politicians, powerful business executives, foreign presidents, and other world leaders. Epstein required Jane Doe 3 to describe the events that she had with these men so that he could potentially blackmail them. When the Politico story hit, it unleashed a firestorm of press. And for Maxwell, who we'd referenced by name in the complaint, that was particularly unwelcome. Maxwell had been attempting a reputational makeover by founding the Terramar Project, a self-described environmental non-profit organization. That's what I'm talking about. That was vaguely focused on creating a global ocean community, whatever that means, based on the idea of shared ownership of the high seas. She was in the midst of fundraising, so it was no surprise when on January 2nd, 2015, Maxwell issued a statement through her publicist identifying me by name and calling me a liar. Jane Doe number 3 is Virginia Roberts, the statement began. The original allegations are not new and have been fully responded to and shown to be untrue, it went on. Each time the story is retold, it changes with new salacious details about public figures and world leaders. Each time the story is retold, she's told it once. She's gone to the, she's said she doesn't want to, she said she's not going to say anything. Then she's gone to the police. And then she's been contacted by a journalist who's put a lot of words in her mouth. Let's get it right, G-Max. Ms. Roberts' claims are obvious lies and should be treated as such and not publicised as news, as they are defamatory. On January 13th, 2015, Sharon Churcher, here she is again, determined to capitalise on my being back in the news, wrote a misleading news story about the handwritten pages about my time with Prince Andrew that I'd handed her the day we first met in 2011. Photos of those pages, my loopy handwriting on lined paper, accompanied a story by Churcher on the gossip site Radar Online. And its headline couldn't have been more breathless or error-ridden. Diary entries of teen slave detail sordid hookup with Prince Andrew in her own handwriting. Billed as a bombshell world exclusive, the story was inaccurate in that it described the 24 pages I'd given her as a secret diary, and I'd implied I'd written them as a teenager when I was with Epstein, not a decade later when she asked me to. Reading those pages again, I was embarrassed by the girlish tone, but more than that, I was disgusted by Churcher. Once I believed she was my friend, now I saw she was nothing but a bottom feeder. How long, I wondered, would she try to dine out on her years-old interviews with me? Yeah, so she met her in 2011 and we're now in 2015, so that's 4 years. She's right. You know what else I was thinking as well is like Harvey Weinstein, yeah, hired an ex-Mossad. Well, actually he was, wait a minute, he was in the IDF. A guy who's in the IDF and he worked for Mossad. And they were behind the Black Cube agency. And that's who Harvey Weinstein hired to try and kill off any stories coming out about him. And that's exactly what the guy did. He posed as a journalist, contacted Rose McGowan and said he was writing a piece about exposing Hollywood monsters. So yeah, this goes all the way back to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. They've set the template. They've drawn up the blueprint for this. Where was I? It's no fun being called a liar. It sucks to be the subject of erroneous muckraking. Dr. Lightfoot, my psychologist, had taught me breathing exercises to help with my anxiety attacks. But in these weeks, right after the joinder motion, it was all I could do to not hyperventilate. But then something amazing happened. Boys had a colleague in his firm's Fort Lauderdale office named Sigrid McCauley. She'd been on maternity leave after having her 4th child, and as she was preparing to return to work, Boys mentioned my case to her. While her background was in contractual and securities litigation, Macaulay had volunteered for years on behalf of abused women and foster children. When the CVRA case put me squarely in the spotlight in early 2015, Boys reached out to Macaulay and asked her to meet me. I flew to New York, and the moment I met Macaulay, a striking, willowy blonde with an assertive demeanor, my life changed for the better. I'd always be grateful for Brad Edwards. He'd been the first lawyer to stand up for me. He taught me so much, and he would continue to do so. But in Siggy, as I'd begun calling Macaulay after hearing her mom use this nickname, I felt as if I'd found a sister in arms. Smart, fearless, relentless. Together, David Boys, Brad and Siggy were the legal dream team I needed to begin truly holding my abusers to account. Not that doing so was going to be easy. Can you remember America before the Me Too movement? As I write this, it's been less than 7 years since 3 brave reporters and their sources sparked a conversation about... There was just a noise. As I write this, it's been less than 7 years since 3 brave reporters and their sources sparked a conversation about sexual harassment, assault, gender, and power by revealing countless bad acts by movie producer Harvey Weinstein. Still, many have forgotten how dangerous it was then for women to confront their abusers. It's still dangerous, to be sure, but it was way worse then. Even if we wanted to, Siggy and I will never be able to forget. I think as a woman, all of our lives changed because of Me Too. I certainly know it has for me. When she and I joined forces in early 2015, It was more than 2 years before Weinstein's depravity would be unmasked, and many people were unaware of the existence of serial abusers like him. Moreover, many were skeptical then of female victims who came forward. Actually, I'm being too polite. Let me rephrase. At that time, survivors of abuse who took on those who'd victimized them were routinely discredited, treated like whores, and beaten up all over again in the press. I mean, to be fair, it still happens a lot. Siggy and I remember what we call those dark days because we lived through them together. And for me, this headline about me, which appeared in the New York Daily News just weeks after she and I first met, says everything about what we were up against. Prince Vic in false rape flap, sex slave shock, accusers claim tossed in 98 case. Those words appeared on the Daily News front page on February 23, 2015, superimposed on the photo of Prince Andrew with his arm around his victim, me, Virginia Roberts, who claims she had orgies with Andrew as a slave, made R-word claim against 2 teens when she was 14, read a caption. Readers who turned the page found an article based on a leaked 17-year-old Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office report that had been written when I was 14. I've already described the disturbing details of what deputies were investigating back then. 2 teenage boys, one 17 and the other 18. I think I actually left this bit out when I was doing my reading because it was very explicit. But they assaulted her in the back of a car when she was unconscious in 1998. Now I was 31 years old and I had just named a few of my Epstein-related abusers in court filings. In response, someone had dug up this confidential report and fed it to the press. Why does this story sound so familiar? Juvenile records, especially reports about minor victims, are supposed to be kept under seal. But a legal breach wasn't the worst thing about this article. The worst thing was that it and its false R-word headline misinterpreted what the leaked report said, making it look like prosecutors dropped the case because they didn't believe I was telling the truth. In fact, the reason the case wasn't prosecuted was murkier. The assault had been reported by a counsellor at Growing Together because I was enrolled there. That was the rehab centre she went to. Investigators who wanted to interview me had difficulty contacting me, the report acknowledged, and both boys, while they confirmed they'd slept with me, insisted it was consensual, so it was the classic he said, she said situation. Yes, the documents stated the case was not prosecuted due to the victim's lack of credibility and no substantial likelihood of success at trial. But according to Siggy, that was boilerplate language used by law enforcement when a case was inconclusive. Reached for comment, Siggy tried to point out that for the prosecutors to describe her as not credible means only that they did not think they had sufficient evidence to win. But she was intimately assaulted. The Daily News quoted Siggy as saying, And to be victimised all over again with the leak of sealed juvenile records is disgraceful. Despite the efforts of her critics, she will not be silenced. I loved having this strong woman fighting for me, and I told Siggy so. I would soon nickname her Superwoman. But even with Superwoman in my corner, the Daily News' callous rehashing of my awful childhood felt like a low blow. When that first story dropped, Siggy and I got on the phone, and she told me we probably needed to brace for more of the same. In her previous legal work, Siggy said, no comment had been her usual response to media inquiries, but we were dealing with something different here, she believed. Reading the article, it seemed that the reporter had cherry-picked phrases from the leaked sheriff's report with the goal of painting as withering a portrait of me as possible. For example, the story quoted the report as saying my mother had told a detective in 1998 about her daughter's past abuse, substance abuse, and also how many kids in Royal Palm Beach are involved with substances, witchcraft, and animal sacrifice. I mean, talk about guilt by association. I've been accused of a lot of things, but animal sacrifice? No one loves animals more than I do. 5 days after the leaked rape report article, the Daily News came after me again. This piece, co-written by the author of the earlier piece, was headlined, Jeffrey Epstein accuser was not a slave, but a money-hungry sex kitten, her former friends say. Whoa. The story, which described me as a hard-partying teen who eagerly traded for cash, relied heavily on a Loxahatchee, Florida resident named Philip Goodillon, who said he'd been at Growing Together at the same time I was, though I had no memory of him. Goodillon claimed I was Epstein's head bee and said I never looked like I was being held captive. What the article didn't say was that Goodillon had a rap sheet that included grand theft, trafficking in stolen property, coke possession, and resisting an officer. Goodillon would also later be convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for striking a man in the head and causing his death at a bar. In February 25, there's a footnote here. In February 25, the South Carolina Supreme Court reversed the conviction and ordered a new trial, finding that the lower court failed to give the jury proper instructions regarding Goodillon's defense. I think the point is that they could have got a more stable witness. Goodillon was not exactly a reputable source who knew me well. Another footnote. We would later learn that in the days after my joinder motion that named names, Epstein and Maxwell had communicated about how to convince people to discredit me. You can issue a reward, Epstein had written Maxwell in an email dated January 12, 2015, to any of Virginia's friends, acquaintance, family that come forward to help prove her allegations are false. Interesting. I didn't see that one being named in the latest batch we just been hearing about in the news. Blackmailer. He is a blackmailer. Again, Siggy tried to defend me. To say that our client acquiesced in this abuse, or that the abuse was okay because she was paid for it, leaves out the fact that this is why we have laws in the United States to protect minor children who are groomed and trafficked by adults, she told the Daily News. Blaming a minor child who was being trafficked by a wealthy and incredibly powerful individual is irresponsible and works only to silence other victims and reward the abuser. Well, that's it, isn't it? That is it. The hypocrisy of these papers that say they want to protect children, think of the children and women and children, and then what they're doing is the exact opposite. But Siggy might as well have been screaming into the wind. She and Brad and I were coming to the conclusion that if we wanted to battle these smear campaigns and focus attention on the truth, we needed to do more than have Siggy comment. After some media reports insinuated that I was an inadequate mother who was setting a bad example for her 3 children by lying, I wholeheartedly agreed. These stories proved to me that certain critics of mine would stop at nothing to hurt me and my family. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that people affiliated with Epstein, a legendary paedophile, were quick to throw shade on my children. But that was the last straw for me. It was time to take back control of my narrative from those who sought to shame me. I had come so far. Just 13 years before, I'd flown to a foreign country with little idea of how I would break free from Epstein and Maxwell. Now, not only had I liberated myself, but I'd also fortified my resolve, transforming from a skittish teenager who wished only to disappear into a strong woman whose name and face were becoming linked. Sorry, I said that. Let me start that again. Now, not only had I liberated myself, but I'd also fortified my resolve, transforming from a skittish teenager who wished only to disappear into a strong woman whose name and face were becoming linked in the public sphere with the idea that victims should hold their abusers to account. I was just thinking, like, if you actually, I don't know if her Instagram is still public, but if you look at any of her Instagram posts of her, like, unfortunately, she was in hospital quite a lot, but her demeanor, her manner is very, very gentle. So I really believe what she's saying. When my critics took aim at my ability to parent my children, that pushed me to a new level of ferocity. I'd built a family with Robbie. I'd drawn a line with my father. I'd unpacked some of my worst baggage with Dr. Lightfoot. And with the help of my lawyers, I'd put names to some of my abusers' faces. Faces that I still could see as clearly as when I'd first laid eyes on them. I'd also taken the first steps towards joining a growing community of women who'd survived Epstein's and Maxwell's abuse and who were adamant that this twosome and others in their circle pay for what they had done. On my best days, I could picture myself standing shoulder to shoulder alongside these brave women. While I still had moments of weakness, more and more I was feeling strong. It was time to fight, and for the first time in my life, I felt ready. Part 4. Let me see if I've got any comments. We are all under the same oppressor, different names, same systems. Sorry, you make me feel less crazy. Thank you. I wish I could put your comment up. I'm so like, oh. Oh, yeah, I can. Wait. Let's put that up. Here we go. yeah, I think that's why I wanted to do this with other people, because, you know, so many women have been through this and are still going through it every day. And, you know, why are we still fighting? That's what I feel like. I'm like, Me Too happened and it completely transformed the landscape, because even like just recently, I met up with a male friend who I haven't seen for ages. And he was like, you know, because we came from like the hip hop background, yeah. The hip hop background is so misogynist. But yeah, at the time it just felt normal to us. Like we really weren't um we were in the fog, we were in the cloud. Um and he was saying, like, you know, and he's a dad. So he was saying he's talking to his wife and she had to explain to him, like, this is what goes on, you know? And a lot of guys just don't get it, because it's a guy's world. It's a guy's world. But up until Me Too, you just didn't speak about it. You did not speak out about it. Even if someone was assaulted, it was kind of like hush, hush. Like it was not openly discussed. So I do think that, like, things have changed a lot. If a woman speaks now, we're ready to hear her, we're ready to understand, you know, we're ready to listen to hear what she has to say. And hopefully you know, there will be a group of people that will stand up to the bullies and the perpetrators that want to shame and silence her. So, but yeah, it's just crazy that we still have to fight in 2025, you know. And then, like she was saying, the CPS in this country, they just don't prosecute for these offences because they don't think they're going to win, instead of working out a way of dealing with the problem, of making it safer. Nothing changes. It's like, well, yeah, it's just very difficult to prove that. So unfortunately, we can't take it any further. Part 4, Warrior. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. This is why, I'm sorry, I do my channel. I don't care if I've only got 1,000 subscribers. I'm not going to do trash videos jumping on, you know. I've already seen, I made a video about a true crime story that has 74,000 views. Like, I'm not dumb. I could easily do those kind of videos. I'm not about that. I still go to protests. I think it's important. I'm often on my own. That's another reason why I come to YouTube, is because in my personal life, most people around me don't feel as passionately about this stuff as me. They acknowledge that these are all problems, but they're not prepared to actually do anything. And I'm like, yeah, but if we all did something, something might happen, you know? Anyway, back to the book. 27, The Point of No Return. Picture a family of 5 mugging for the camera in their annual Christmas portrait. Every December since their first child was born, Mom has gotten Dad to take their whole brood to the local shopping mall to wait in line for a photograph with Santa Claus. Even in years that money was tight, Mom saved up to pay for this image, insisting it was worth every penny. Now, though, her 2 sons and 1 daughter are older, No one believes in Santa anymore, and so everyone, including Dad, grumbles when asked to pose each year with a chubby, bearded man in a red suit and hat. I'm not being funny, but I think some of those Santas were a bit creepy. Still, Mum won't relent. She's willing to die on this holiday hill. You'll thank me for this later, I say. It's important, I tell my family, to revel in life's most joyous moments. Call them silly rituals all you want, I say, but we must preserve happy memories because there will be times ahead when we will need them. Happy memories can keep a person going. I know this better than most because I once had so few of them. The house Robbie and I rented in Penrose, Colorado, sat on 5 acres of flat, dusty farmland. To get there, you turned off J Street and drove down a curved dirt and gravel road that led only to our front door, which was white with a large oval leaded window that afforded a glimpse into our small entryway. When we moved in, I thought the see-through door had a certain country charm, but the main reason we picked it was that my mom and her husband Stan lived close by. Suddenly, I was spending more time with Mom than I had since my childhood. For more than a dozen years, she and I had lived 8,000 miles apart. Now we were neighbours. It meant the world to me that she was finally getting to spend time with her grandchildren, ages 8, 7, and 4. When she visited us, she doted on them, especially when she played with Ellie. I remembered what Mum had been like with me when I was small. My mother could be so loving. It was good to see that again. The other day, I saw an Instagram video of one of my favourite singer-songwriters, Pink, on the Today Show promoting her album Trustful, describing the difficult relationship she's had with her own mother and how they've tried to reconcile. Pink said, "Love is a lifetime of coming back to the table." Boy, does that resonate with me. By moving to Penrose, I had come back to the table where my mother had been sitting for years. She was not exactly the same woman I'd grown up with, although a part of her always would be. When I was a teen, she'd kept me at a distance. Now she wanted to be part of my life. Mom proved to be an inexperienced babysitter. The single time she offered, it lasted just 20 minutes until Tyler somehow got his finger stuck in the trigger of a plastic Nerf gun and she called me begging me to come back. But I wasn't eager to leave my kids alone with her anyway, and yet I was comforted knowing that she was close by. I don't want to give the false impression that we somehow resolved all our past disputes during this period. When I told her, for example, a few of the names of the men I'd been trafficked to by Epstein, she repeated what she'd said to me before, that she didn't want to hear about any of my past abuse. It made her too upset. My mother definitely doesn't believe in talking things out. Nonetheless, a girl needs her mom, and I'd gone without mine for a long time. I was feeling more attached to her than I had in forever, a feeling that only intensified when scary things started happening. Things Robbie and I couldn't explain. Since my joinder motion had been filed in the CVRA case, we had come home more than once to find evidence that strangers had been inside our house. Robbie was vigilant about placing wooden drop bars in the sliding windows and doors to prevent them from being opened, and he always deadbolted all our locks. Nonetheless, it was becoming routine for us to return home to find the deadbolts unlocked. One afternoon, we came back from a trip to Walmart and discovered the front door wide open. Our Malamute bear, who we'd left inside, was out in the street. We called the sheriff's department, and when we told the deputies who responded that nothing had been stolen, they speculated that the intruders might have entered in order to install some sort of spyware on our computers. They recommended that deputies place surveillance cameras outside to record the make and model of every vehicle that drove up our driveway. Of course, we said yes, and soon they'd rigged an elaborate system aiming every which way. They also suggested that we obtain a means of self-defense, and so we headed to Warrior Kit, a law enforcement supply store about 20 miles from our house in West Pueblo. Here we go. Let me just adjust myself. We bought 2 weapons that fire. I don't think you're allowed to say that word on YouTube. And a safe to keep them in, a 5-shot beginning with R, known as the Judge for me, and a 9mm handgun for Robbie. For a few months after that, we were regulars at the shooting range in Warrior Kit's basement. Both Robbie and I wanted to feel confident that if the time came, we know how to defend our family. Paparazzi followed us everywhere in and around Penrose. Once, I walked out our front door and smacked right into one of them. He asked me a question. I declined to comment, and he took my picture. Soon that photo of me with a beige coat, a black scarf, and a knit beanie on my head was ricocheting around the world with a caption that said I was hiding out in Colorado. On another occasion, when the kids were sick, paparazzi snapped images of me leading them out of a doctor's office. I wanted to scream, "Get away from my family, leave my kids out of it." Even in my imagination, I swear like a true Australian. But instead of letting loose like that, I just hustled my children to the car. All this was more than intrusive, it was dangerous. I got run off the road once by what I presumed were tabloid journalists. I sat in the locked car on the side of the road, shielding my face and trying not to panic until they finally left us alone. We were chased so often that Robbie became adept at turning down side streets at the last moment, pulling speedy U-turns and driving more like we were in a war zone than a rural hamlet. This was crazy making. I would scream at Robbie to slow down. He would scream at me that the United States was a ridiculous, lawless country. I mean, he's got a point. I would yell that paparazzi existed everywhere on Earth. That's true. He would yell that maybe it was time to put our family's welfare ahead of my desire to seek justice. I would fume. He would slam his foot down harder on the gas pedal. At times, it felt like we were skirting the outer limits of our sanity. Yeah, wasn't that when she had to make a report against him as well? I have a feeling it was in 2015 in Colorado. In April 2015, 2 important things happened, both of them frustrating. On April 7th, Judge Kenneth Mara, the judge presiding over the CVRA case, ruled that I could not join as Jane Doe 3 because my filing was duplicative of the existing lawsuit. Moreover, Mara ruled that my allegations about formerly Prince Andrew and others should be struck from the record. At this juncture in the proceedings, these lurid details are unnecessary, Mara wrote. Who the hell is he? While he made no ruling about the veracity of my allegations, Mara said the factual details regarding with whom and where I had been forced to have intercourse with were immaterial and impertinent. However, he noted that I might yet appear as a witness in the case. Brad and I released a statement that said my legal team absolutely respected the judge's ruling. I'm happy to get to participate in this important case, the statement quoted me as saying, but I was disappointed. That disappointment evaporated, though, when Brad and Siggy brought me good news. For months, they'd been putting out feelers to all the major TV networks, gouging whether they wanted to interview me. Everyone had said yes. I was finally going to tell my own story to a news organization that was held in high esteem. We weighed our options, and in the end chose ABC. I was a fan of the anchor A.B. Robach, and her producer Jim Hill was a top-notch investigative reporter. When the interview date was set, Robbie and I decided he would stay in Colorado and the kids would come with me. I wanted them to understand why Mommy was always either on the phone or too often leaving on a plane. The four of us flew to New York City from Denver, and the next day, ABC hired two nannies to take Alex, Tyler, and Ellie to the Central Park Zoo, while I got prepped in a suite at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel on Central Park South. Sitting in that elegant room, getting wired with a microphone, I was excited. This could be a game changer, I thought. I was eager to talk about how the US government had looked the other way when it came to Epstein and Maxwell's crimes. I wanted to describe the anger and betrayal I felt and that all of Epstein's and Maxwell's victims felt. After years of seeing the media as my enemy, I wanted to believe that the media could also help our cause. Robach and I took our seats and the interview began. I felt immediately at ease. Robach was prepared and her tone signaled to me that she was after the truth. This is a story about a guy who's still walking around New York City, free as a bird, who's done all these atrocious things to me and to so many, I remember telling her, and we've never gotten any kind of justice. Robach asked, what about the fact that Epstein had admitted that he'd procured girls for prostitution in Florida? First of all, those girls were underage. I don't count that as justice, I said. I don't think labeling those minor girls prostitutes and then him getting away and then him getting only 13 months in jail with him leaving the jail every day is justice. Do you? For probably 90 minutes, I told Robach everything I knew about how Epstein and Maxwell had organized their trafficking ring. I told her the names of several men I'd been trafficked to. I wept a few times when she asked me to go into detail about a particular instance of abuse, but that was okay. I felt as if I spoke from the heart. When the interview concluded, there was a celebratory feeling in the room. People from the network told Brad and Siggy it had gone great. A segment from the interview would air on Good Morning America, we were told, and then the rest would appear on one of the network's longer format shows. I felt relieved and proud. When I reunited with my kids that night, I told them, your mom did a great job today. Your mom did a good job today. But then the waiting began. We were strung along for weeks with no explanation for the delay. Finally, someone from the network told my legal team that because I'd told Robach about being trafficked to Prince Andrew, the network had to reach out to Buckingham Palace and an attorney for Epstein. Why that was causing such delays was unclear. Roback and her producer were outraged, but for whatever reason, ABC never aired the interview. I was just going to say, I don't remember seeing this. I'd been defeated once again by the people I was trying to speak out against, and I couldn't help but wonder if a media giant like ABC could be shut down in its attempts to reveal the truth. I couldn't help but wonder if a media giant like ABC could be shut down in its attempts to reveal the truth. Was there any hope for survivors like me? Four years later, on November 5th, 2019, a video of Amy Roback speaking on a hot mic was made public that shed a bit more light on what had happened. Roback said that every day I get more and more pissed that her interview with me didn't air, and that what we had was unreal. In the recording, Roback had said that she was told by higher-ups, "Who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story." She also said Epstein's lawyers and the British royal family, I knew it was going to say that, had applied pressure to nix the interview, suggesting that the network caved because it feared losing access to Prince William and Kate Middleton in the future. So there it is. Like we all didn't know that. What did I say about that picture of him and Andy having their goodbye meeting? 28, always my daughter. In July 2015, Robbie and I decided it was time to return to Australia. Robbie's elderly father, who already had prostate cancer, had now been diagnosed with asbestosis. Oh gosh. Between that and the unease we'd been feeling since the first break-in, we no longer felt comfortable in Colorado. This wasn't an easy call for me. I'd had a lot invested in the idea that being in the United States would let me mend some relationships in my family. I'd made some progress, especially with my brothers, but I had also lost some ground. That feeling of loss, plus the fact that my work with Brad and Siggy was far from done, made me reluctant to leave. But any desire I had to stay in America was outweighed by how unhappy I knew Robbie was. While he wanted to work, increasingly, he didn't feel like he could, while still keeping our family safe. It was hard for a proud man like Robbie not to provide for his family. But he and I both had become, I was going to say paranoid, but that's not right. Paranoia is an irrational feeling that people are out to get you. Based on what we'd been through, it was perfectly rational for us to believe that our family was in danger. So in July 2015, Robbie flew home to Australia. I wonder if that was after he assaulted her. The plan was we'd resettle 1,500 miles north of Sydney, near the city of Cairns. Robbie had a friend there who said job prospects were good, and we hoped Cairns' remote location would afford us more privacy. I think, yeah. Robbie would get things set up for us, finding work and a place to live, while I stayed behind with the kids to pack up and resolve a few loose ends. The truth was that Siggy and I had several things to accomplish before it made sense to me to head back down under, which was fine by me because the more I got to know Siggy, the more I respected her. Raised by a single mom who worked 3 jobs to support her 3 daughters, Siggy had been ambitious and determined practically since birth. Though we were just 11 years apart in age, I looked up to her. I soon learned that she'd faced personal challenges. She'd struggled with infertility before finding a doctor who helped her and her husband have the 4 kids she calls IVF miracles. At work, meanwhile, her intellect was matched only by her compassion. Siggy told me she felt she'd been preparing her whole career for a case like mine. Life takes you places for a reason, Virginia, she said, recalling the years she'd spent volunteering in a domestic violence shelter. All that positioned me perfectly to hear your story and to take on your case, the most important of my career. As I'd done with Brad, I worked closely with Siggy to meticulously study photographs of men who were known to be Epstein associates, and we confirmed several more men I remembered being trafficked to. Some of their identities shocked me, if only because they represented such a broad swath of power and influence. I remembered each of these men's faces as if it were the day they abused me. As much as I might wish to, I could never forget them. One of these men would pass away around this time. It was unclear what, if any, action we might take against the rest, but identifying them, even if only to myself, had a redemptive power. They were well-known, sophisticated, wealthy men who enjoyed a certain cachet in their respective fields. With every name I uncovered, I appreciated more fully something I had sensed as a teenager. Had any of us girls reported being trafficked when we were first abused, it was unlikely that anyone would have listened. I wondered if anyone would listen now. That was something I wanted to say as well, is like about Epstein and Maxwell, is the victims that they recruited, a lot of them had already come from being abused and they knew it. In a way, that makes it worse to me. And the other thing I was going to say as well, I meant to mention earlier, is like the excuse of like, well, my wife was there, so I wasn't doing anything. She said the first billionaire that she was trafficked to, that Jubin guy, his pregnant wife was in the next room. What was his name? Glenn Dubin, the one that invested in AI. Siggy, meanwhile, had been studying up on defamation, an area of the law that was evolving in the wake of the Me Too movement, as victims who'd long been silent spoke up. In response, more and more alleged perpetrators were suing their accusers, claiming they'd been defamed. But Siggy believed she'd found a different way for me to challenge Maxwell. Specifically, when Maxwell's publicist issued a statement in January 2015 that called me a liar, Siggy believed Maxwell had defamed me, and she thought not only that she could prove it, but that such an action would allow us to describe the abuse I'd suffered without being hamstrung by the statute of limitations. which prevented me from bringing a criminal case against Maxwell. Siggy explained that when accused persons deny the allegations against them, that does not necessarily mean they can be successful in a defamation suit. Not if it is a mere denial. But Maxwell was somebody who abused you and then called you a liar, she said. That denial is different because it is in the context of a SA case. Now the public can assume Maxwell has information that others don't know about. That's the key, that Maxwell called me a liar based on facts that she knew but that were undisclosed. In other words, her statement implied an assertion of fact. So we are going to say that was defamatory and that you have a right to defend yourself, Siggy said. We will sue her for defamation, and in order to establish the defamation, we will have to get into details surrounding the SA. Have I mentioned that I see Siggy as a superhero? Well, here was more proof of why. In September 2015, Siggy filed my claim against Maxwell in Manhattan Federal Court. It said Maxwell had made a deliberate effort to maliciously discredit me and to silence my efforts to expose sex crimes committed around the world by her, Epstein, and other powerful people. It said Maxwell's denials had damaged my credibility and reiterated that with the assistance of Maxwell, Epstein was able to abuse Guiffre for years until Guiffre eventually escaped. But my favourite line in my suit explained why I was suing in the first place. Ultimately, as a mother and one of Epstein's many victims, Guiffre believed that she should speak out about her abuse experiences in hopes of helping others. I wanted the world to know that becoming a mother, particularly the mother of a daughter, had fueled my determination to act. Late one night in Colorado, after Robbie had returned to Australia, I was folding laundry when I saw headlights on our long, winding driveway. As I've said, we lived on a big lot way off the main road. There was no reason to drive down our gravel drive unless you were visiting us. I wasn't expecting anyone, so the headlights put me on high alert. The car approached slowly, then stopped. I watched for some movement, but the driver stayed put in the front seat, idling with the high beams trained on our see-through front door. Later, I would learn that other Epstein victims had experienced exactly this kind of intimidation. Bright lights aimed at their windows at night. But while I was ignorant of that then, I still knew with certainty that my family was in peril. Moving quickly through the house, I scooped a sleeping Ellie out of her bed and gently placed her on the floor of my closet. Then I woke up Alex and Tyler and led them into the closet too. They were rubbing their eyes confused as I grabbed the laundry I'd been folding and threw it on top of them, trying to hide them from view. I need you to be quiet, I whispered as my sons' faces peeked out from the pile. I'm going to mostly close this door so you will be safe, but don't be scared, I said, trying not to sound frightened myself. Mom is going to take care of this. Turning back toward the front door, I went and got the judge out of the safe and loaded it. Then I grabbed a hold of Bear. Oh, Malum, our Malamute, because he looked scary even though he wouldn't hurt a fly. Slowly, Bear and I approached the front door, which was lit up like a movie set by the headlights. I had the shooter in one hand and Bear's collar in the other. I'm sure the intruders could see us through the leaded glass window, but to make sure, I opened the door just a bit, waving the weapon into the blinding high beams. Then I closed the door and stood there with it cocked, ready. For 5 straight minutes, we faced off like that, the car idling, me gripping my weapon, Bear panting next to me. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the driver put the car in reverse and slowly backed up, then headed off into the darkness. That's when I realised I should have already called the sheriff. So after sticking my head into the closet to reassure the boys, I did. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. No, I told them, I didn't see a license plate. No, I wasn't sure of the make and model of the car. And the sheriff's department had already removed their cameras in anticipation of our move, so we couldn't check any surveillance tapes. The deputies promised to stay in their cruiser outside our house until daybreak. I thanked them, then returned the kids to their beds. Ellie had slept through the whole thing, but it took me a while to get the boys back down. Who was in the car, they asked, the first of so many questions whose answers I didn't know. What did they want? Why didn't they say anything? Finally, Alex and Tyler wore themselves out and fell asleep. Not me, though. I didn't close my eyes at all that night, or on many of the nights thereafter. I knew this wasn't a good idea, especially with small kids in the house. But after that, I went to bed each night with my loaded revolver on the nightstand next to me. How far will these people take it? I asked Robbie when he called to check in. He couldn't stand to speculate, saying only, I want you out of there, Jenna. I want you out of there right now. I'd arrived in the United States hoping that we could start a new life here. But now, less than 2 years later, I agreed with Robbie. We couldn't get back to Australia fast enough. Mom helped me pack the irreplaceable stuff. A ceramic parrot Tyler had made in the first grade, as well as other mementos and keepsakes to take back to Australia. On one of our last days in Colorado, Mum and I were boxing up a few last items in one of the kids' rooms when I heard her say my name. I looked up from the suitcase I was trying to close and saw her holding a rectangular needle-pointed pillow. My mom gave this to me, and now I want you to have it, Mom said, smoothing the pillow's crimson velvet piping before offering it to me. The face of the pillow had a border of tiny cross-stitched red flowers and green leaves that encircled these words in all capital letters. Always my daughter, now too my friend. This is what I want for us, she said, and her eyes were wet. In that moment, I thought, this is probably the closest to an apology I'm ever going to get. And I was okay with that. Sitting on the floor of our Colorado rental, I had done enough healing and maturing to see Mom more clearly. The woman she was, but also the overwhelmed young mother of 3 that she once had been. I think it's important to know where you come from. For better or worse, the people who made you will always be part of who you are. I knew that I couldn't ever rely on either of my parents, and that I could never change them. They were both too broken. But I also saw that part of Mom wished she could become someone better, a person capable of being there for me. I'd like to say Australia welcomed us with open arms in October 2015, but we had a difficult re-entry. The house Robbie had rented for us in Palm Cove, about 25 miles north of Cairns, was fine, but he'd not had time to make it a home. We had a TV and a microwave, but no furniture or bedding, and we couldn't afford to go shopping. Robbie had found a job working security at a resort, but still, after we bought a used car and paid the deposit on the rental, money was tight. Those first couple of nights, we all slept on the floor. At the end of the year, Robbie scored a better security job at a hospital. With bankruptcy no longer imminent, we both started to breathe a little easier. For years now, my increasing activism had created a push-pull between us that at times had taken Robbie's and my marriage to the brink. While we both agreed on the principle that had driven me to become a more public figure, the arseholes shouldn't be allowed to win. The fact was that my refusal to stay silent while honourable had real consequences for our family. At least now, I told myself, we were back in Robbie's country, where he felt more at ease, to the extent that there were more consequences looking ahead. At least my husband would be standing strong on his own turf as he helped me to meet them. How's everyone doing? You said in another live, you said if only more people just have to start talking. Thank you for doing this. Yeah, it's really difficult, honestly. I try and ask people to come onto my channel and talk about stuff that they've been through. And sometimes I don't get a reply. And sometimes they just don't want to come. They just don't want to speak. Like, I've even suggested, you can be in full anonymity, you can be just a voice, you can be silhouetted. Because I have one friend that she used to do like cam girling, and she worked for Andrew Tate's company, and yeah, I can't get her to. I've even sent her the questions. She's like, the questions are great. Like, she doesn't want to do it, and I'm like, I would never ever ever pressure anyone into it. But I feel like it's really important to understand that you can so easily find yourself in a situation and then have it thrown back at you and make you feel like you deserved what happened to you, So I just wanted to put that comment up about Virginia. I agree. Virginia really is inspiring. She never stopped fighting. She still had her vulnerability. She allowed herself to love, and it's good to hear her beyond Epstein. Exactly. She was a full human. I agree. She doesn't... I feel like it's very authentic what we're hearing. She's given us... She hasn't made herself seem too perfect. Do you know what I mean? And she definitely seems like someone that has self-reflection and self-awareness. And I think she wanted that for her parents. And I think I'm actually surprised because when she said she was going to visit her mum, I was like, oh no. But yeah, that takes so much strength to go and try and rebuild a relationship with someone who can't rebuild themselves, and then sort of like admit to yourself, well, this is as good as it's going to get. You know, that shows so much strength of character. Okay, chapter 29. I solemnly swear. For me, 2016 would be the year of the deposition. I think this might have to be the last chapter. I can't believe it's been 2 hours already. For me, 2016 would be the year of the deposition. As part of my defamation case against Maxwell, my lawyers would depose her twice in 2016, and her lawyers would depose me twice, both times in Denver. Also, in 2016, many people I'd known when I was in Epstein's orbit would be deposed. My mother, my father, my former boyfriends, Michael and Tony, another Epstein survivor, Johanna Schoberg, one John Alessi, Epstein's house manager in Palm Beach, and of course Epstein himself. Of all these people, Epstein alone invoked the fifth, refusing to answer so as to not incriminate himself. How ironic. What is it like to be deposed? No matter the subject matter, it is grueling. And as you can imagine, when the questioning revolves around years old SA, it is especially painful. During one deposition, I would become so agitated that when we took a brief break, I went to the restroom and vomited. In that same deposition, I would also flinch as a lawyer flung photos of my children on the table in front of me, as close to a mafia-style intimidation tactic as I'd ever seen. The lawyers claimed to be making a point about my use of Facebook and how I couldn't be in fear for my life, as I claimed if I posted pictures of my kids there. But I saw only malevolence. Maybe it's because the lawyer's behaviour brought Epstein to mind. The memory of him tossing that photo of Skydie on his desk, telling me never to go to the police, had never left me. I interpreted this brazen display of my baby's faces as a direct threat. So we've talked about this use of social media weaponization in previous episodes. Please don't hear this as a plea for sympathy. No one ever promised me that challenging my abusers would be easy. I had chosen to take these vile people on, and I'd always known that would mean an uphill fight. I was still talking to my psychologist, Judith Lightfoot, every Monday on the phone. In addition to recommending meditation and breathing exercises, she was encouraging me to speak out, saying she thought that the more vocal I became, the stronger I would feel. Still, this would be a hugely tiring year. Part of that was logistical. Between depositions I gave and depositions I witnessed, I travelled from Australia to the United States and back 4 times in 2016. Robbie's parents were living with us, which was the only way my absences were possible. Nono ferried the kids to and from school, and Nonna cooked and kept the house tidy while Robbie did his shifts at the hospital. But what really wore me out were the emotions all this stirred up. In her deposition, which I did not attend, my mother was asked why I'd stopped working at Mar-a-Lago. Here we go. She said she didn't know anything about it, but that my father had told her that I was being educated by Maxwell, who Mom described as my new mama. In his deposition, my father said that when he met Epstein at El Brillo Way, the pedophile seemed just fine to me. I mean, you can't tell people by looking at them. But then Dad added that he didn't like my then boyfriend, Michael. Of course, what parent cares for your daughter's boyfriend? I didn't think anybody was good enough for my daughter, but that's just me. Both my parents' testimony revealed that, as usual, they were driven by a desire to protect themselves. This wasn't news, but it was still painful for me to read. Jo Berg's deposition transcript was easier to digest because she confirmed what I had experienced. Jo Berg described how Maxwell approached her on the main campus of Palm Beach Atlantic University, where she was a 21-year-old student. Maxwell said she was looking to hire someone for $20 an hour to answer phones, get drinks, and help around the house. She compared the job to that of a butler, but said butlers were too stuffy. Jo Berg accompanied Maxwell to Epstein's mansion and did as she asked. But the next time Maxwell asked her to come, Jo Berg was told she would be making $100 an hour rubbing feet. Jo Berg, who has said her relationship with Epstein was platonic at first, but that later he pressured her into sleeping with him, also travelled to Little St. James. She remembered her and me messaging Epstein together on the beach there, and she recalled the night in Epstein's Manhattan townhouse when Maxwell gave formerly Prince Andrew the puppet that resembled him and then put the puppet's hand on my breast. I wonder what happened to that picture. Did Maxwell ever share with you whether it bothered her that Jeffrey had so many girls around? Siggy asked Jo Berg. No, Jo Berg replied. Actually, the opposite. She let me know that she would not be able to please him as much as he needed, and that is why there were other girls around. Jo Berg also confirmed that Maxwell always said she wasn't bothered by how many girls Epstein slept with, and she described how Epstein once requested that she bring a female friend of hers, a physical trainer, to his house. When the friend of Jo Berg's arrived, Epstein asked the woman, "You see that girl over there laying by the pool? I just took her virginity." Jo Berg said her friend was mortified by Epstein's lecherous boasting, but me, when I read this account, all I could think was, yeah, that's Epstein to a T. I couldn't attend all these depositions. I'd been away from the kids enough as it was, but there was one deposition that I knew I needed to be there for. Tony Figueroa's. I hadn't spoken to Tony since I was in Thailand, so I wasn't sure what he'd say. He knew so much that could confirm what I'd been through, but I knew Tony was upset by my disappearance from his life 14 years ago. The deposition had been scheduled by Maxwell's lawyers. Why would they seek out Tony, my lawyers wondered, unless they thought he'd give testimony that would help their client and hurt me? Brad had a preliminary call with Tony, who gave him an earful. Tony said I ditched him, embarrassed him, and left him in an apartment whose rent he couldn't afford. When Brad told Tony all we needed was for him to tell the truth, Tony replied, "I'm not doing shit until I talk to Virginia. I need some explanation about why she effed me over." So 2 days before his deposition, I dialed Tony's number. When he answered, I told him I was sorry for the way our relationship had ended in 2002. I mean, this guy did cheat on her. But also for causing him to be dragged into this mess in 2016. I knew he was just trying to live his life, I said, and I understood it was no fun to rehash our difficult history, because we'd once tried to break free together to make a life outside Epstein's orbit when I escaped on my own. I knew Tony felt abandoned. On the phone, I acknowledged that. We'd been kids together, I said. I didn't want to cause him pain, not then and not now. 48 hours later, Brad and I headed to a Florida law office for the deposition. Tony and I said hello in the hallway, but he was nervous and looked away. I wasn't sure how this was going to go. I needn't have worried, though. Under questioning from Maxwell's lawyer, Tony recalled that while we were living together, I travelled with Epstein 2 weeks per month or so. He confirmed that I told him I was forced to sleep with Epstein, Maxwell, and their friends. He confirmed that I told him I was forced to have sex with Epstein, Maxwell, and their friends. He remembered me talking about being forced to recruit other girls and about the toys Epstein and Maxwell liked to use on us victims. Tony recalled that when he and I tried to leave Epstein behind, I relished the freedom. Like she did not want to go back there, he said. Asked what I was trying to get away from, he said, to stop being used and abused. Tony remembered me saying I'd been forced to have relations with formerly Prince Andrew, and he described worrying about my safety while I was in London. When asked why, he responded, just the way she was talking to me, like she sounded scared. He recalled that when I returned from that trip, he saw the photograph of Andrew with his arm around me, and he remembered that after I escaped, Maxwell called him and asked if he could find any other girls for Epstein. She just said, "Hi, this is Jane. Jeffrey was wondering if you had anybody that could come over," Tony said. But the most poignant part of the deposition for me was when Maxwell's attorney asked Tony if we'd seen each other since I told him goodbye in 2002. Nope, he said, and his face looked truly sad. It didn't feel real, he said, that I was sitting across a table from him. It's like talking to a ghost or seeing one, he said. Later, Brad said he thought Tony simply needed to see me to put our unresolved breakup behind him. I hoped Brad was right. The most important person my lawyers needed to question under oath, of course, was Maxwell herself. A first deposition was scheduled, but would it happen? Maxwell had avoided being deposed before. In 2010, for example, Brad had served Maxwell with a subpoena related to his CVRA case. Just hours before it was due to start, however, Maxwell's lawyer called to say that she was leaving the country with no plans to return because her mother was ill. Weeks later, Maxwell was back on American soil as one of 400 guests at Chelsea Clinton's July 31st wedding in Rhinebeck, New York. Obviously considered that an important occasion. Still, Brad's deposition never took place. Now, 6 years later, Brad was looking forward to finally putting Maxwell in the hot seat at the Boys Schiller Flexner offices in Manhattan. But less than 24 hours before, Maxwell's lawyers challenged what's known as pro hac vice, a temporary grant of permission for Paul Castle and Brad, who were licensed in Florida, to represent me, their client, in New York. The judge ruled that Siggy would be the one questioning Maxwell. This was an unexpected curveball. Pro hacs, as these requests for temporary permission are known, are rarely challenged. Siggy was counsel of record and had been working day and night on my case, including helping Brad prepare for the depot. But still, she told me, it's different when you're the one in the box. Don't worry, Sig. Maxwell is going to take the fifth, Brad predicted. I mean, we all know the crimes that she's committed. There's no way she cannot take the fifth. Still, just to be safe, Siggy stayed up all night preparing two things: a lengthy list of questions she didn't expect to get substantive answers to, and a strategy to deal with the master manipulator she knew Maxwell to be. The deposition began just after 9 a.m. on April 22nd, 2016. After Maxwell was sworn in, Siggy asked her to state her her address and her date of birth. Then Superwoman asked her first substantive question. When did you first recruit a female to work for Mr. Epstein? Maxwell acted confused. I don't understand what you mean by female, she said. I don't understand what you mean by recruit. Siggy didn't blink. Are you a female? She asked Maxwell. She said yes. Then Siggy repeated her question. It would take several back and forth before Maxwell finally said she'd first hired a woman who was 40 or 50 years old to work for Epstein, probably in 1992. This was going to be slow going, it seemed, but that was all right, because amazingly, Maxwell wasn't taking the fifth. Did you ever hire someone who was under the age of 18? Siggy asked. Never, Maxwell said. Did you invite Virginia Giuffre to come to Jeffrey Epstein's house when she was under the age of 18? Siggy continued. Maxwell shot back. Virginia Roberts held herself out as a masseuse and invited herself to come and give a massage. Siggy repeated her question, word for word, which prompted Maxwell to quibble. Again, I did not invite Virginia Roberts. She came as a masseuse, and so it went on for hours. Maxwell said she didn't recall meeting me at Mar-a-Lago and denied participating in that first massage that she'd recruited me to give Epstein. In fact, she denied ever giving a massage in my presence. Siggy forged ahead. She'd begun noticing that Maxwell got agitated every time she looked down at her notes, ignoring Maxwell. So she continued, not making eye contact, getting under Maxwell's skin. Have you heard Mr. Epstein use the phrase, the younger the better? She asked. Maxwell said she had no such recollection and called me just an awful fantasist. When Maxwell didn't want to answer something, she was dismissive. Let's move on, she demanded. At one point, haughty as ever, Siggy remained calm. I'm in charge of the deposition, Siggy said. I say when we move on and when we don't. When Siggy asked, did you have a basket of sex toys that you kept in the Palm Beach house? Maxwell obfuscated. First of all, what do you mean? She asked. In response, Siggy repeated the question. She would soon have to repeat it again, and then again, and then again. Maxwell kept issuing denials and asking Siggy to define even simple words, puppet, party, school, regularly. The list went on and on. I never, ever, at any single time, at any point, ever, at all, participated in anything with Virginia and Jeffrey, Maxwell said. I barely would remember her if not for all this rubbish. Over and over, when Siggy asked Maxwell if she was aware of some particular detail in the case, Maxwell was non-responsive, saying instead, I am aware that Virginia has lied repeatedly. But there were signs that Maxwell was starting to crack. You are trying to trap me. I will not be trapped, she admonished Siggy. Maxwell denied being able to recall flying on Epstein's plane with me, and then when given flight logs that listed her initials next to mine, protested, "How do you know the GM is me?" After Siggy asked if Maxwell had ever taken photographs of naked or semi-naked girls at Epstein's homes, Maxwell snapped, "I know where you're headed with this, and it's nowhere appropriate." Siggy held her ground again. "I'm not heading anywhere. I'm just asking the questions." After a lunch break, the tightly controlled Maxwell finally, the tightly controlled Maxwell finally lost her temper. She had repeated that she didn't remember meeting me at Mar-a-Lago, prompting Siggy to ask, "Are you saying that it was an obvious lie that you approached Virginia while she was underage at Mar-a-Lago?" Maxwell's lawyer objected, but his client went off. She was particularly worked up about me getting my age wrong in my first civil suit against Epstein way back in 2009. As I've explained, when I'd said I was 15 when I met her, when I was actually 16. It had been an honest mistake, but Maxwell described it as a lie that was perpetuated between all of you to make the story more exciting. "Can we agree on that?" she bellowed. "That is not my question," Siggy responded. But Maxwell kept going, and now she began to slam her fists on the table as she spoke. "Can we agree she was not the age she said, and you put that in the press? That is obviously slam, manifestly slam, absolutely slam, totally a lie." Maxwell was a fearsome sight, apparently, as she pounded the table. The court reporter, a usually unflappable woman, whom Siggy had known for years, looked more terrified than Siggy had ever seen her. But Siggy? She was a woman of steel. "I'm going to put on the record," Siggy stated, "Miss Maxwell very inappropriately and very harshly pounded our law firm table." Oh yeah, this is her deposition. This is in the office. Thinking it was in the courtroom. I asked she take a deep breath and calm down. The lawyers agreed it was a good time for a break. It was 1:56 p.m. 17 minutes later, the deposition resumed and went on, with Maxwell denying all wrongdoing, denying that she knew I'd gone to Thailand, denying that she gave me instructions to meet a girl there, denying, but they had the phone records, until Siggy ran out of time at 6:43 p.m. In the end, the deposition, including breaks, had stretched over 10 hours. And Siggy had interrogated Maxwell for 7 of them. Since then, I've read that some lawyers who've faced off against Siggy compare her to Uma Thurman's sword-wielding assassin in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill films. "Unexpectedly deadly" is how an adversary once described her. To me, Siggy's performance with Maxwell only confirmed that. I mean, the thing is, it doesn't even make sense, because how could she come and give Epstein a massage when she obviously didn't know how to do massages? So obviously someone showed her how to do it, and Maxwell was the only other person there. And we've seen pictures of her doing foot massages, so yeah, caught in a lie. David Boys would also shine a few months later when he deposed Maxwell in a second session. "All my lawyers David, Siggy, Brad, and Paul Cassell were working so hard for me. Brad and Siggy were both by my side during my 2 depositions, conducted by Maxwell's lawyers in Denver, and my lawyers were also deposing scores of others who had knowledge of Maxwell's behaviour. For example, they'd taken the deposition of Ronaldo Rizzo, a former chef of an Epstein associate and his wife. Rizzo said that on one occasion, Epstein and Maxwell had brought a 15-year-old Swedish girl to this couple's home and then left her in the kitchen with Rizzo and his wife, who were cooking dinner. At first, the girl stayed quiet, but she was quivering and shaking and appeared to be terrified. When Rizzo asked about her connection to Epstein, though, the girl began weeping and blurted out that she had been on Epstein's island with Maxwell and another woman. The girl claimed that the 3 adults had pressured her to have intercourse, but she declined. Jelaine took my passport. Rizzo recalled the girl telling him and his wife. Rizzo recalled the girl telling him and his wife. The girl also said Maxwell had threatened her, Rizzo said, and told her not to tell anyone about their inappropriate advances. This is a 15-year-old. As someone who'd frequently had my passport held by Maxwell, I read this deposition with a queasy feeling. I knew how scary it was to be controlled by that woman. Rizzo's account was an important corroboration of my own experience. I mean, 15, 16. I'm just saying, like, these were teenagers, children. They are children that you're putting into adult work that's going to hurt them physically and mentally. But if I had to point to a single example of my team's excellent work, it would have to be the response to Maxwell's motion for summary judgment. We all know what that means. That Siggy filed on January 31st, 2017. Maxwell's team was claiming that I'd raised no genuine issue to be tried. They had asked the judge to rule in Maxwell's favour and make this case go away. Not so fast, wrote Siggy. First, she tore apart Maxwell's argument that she could not have abused or trafficked me when I was a minor, summarising Maxwell's contention that employment records show that Ms. Guiffre was either 16 or 17 when defendant recruited her from a job from her job at Mar-a-Lago for sex with Epstein, not 15 years old as plaintiff originally thought, Siggy asserted. Call this the yes, I'm a S trafficker but only of 16-year-old girls defense, right? As if that makes it okay. In response to Maxwell's claim that she didn't regularly participate in Epstein's exploitation on minors, Siggy wrote, call this the yes, I'm an S trafficker, but only on Tuesdays and Thursdays defense. In response to Maxwell's argument that I couldn't have been a slave because I was not confined or made Maxwell's legal property, Siggy quoted an expert on trafficking who explained that people didn't have to be chained to a bed to be considered victims of contemporary forms of slavery. Right? Siggy then characterized Maxwell's stance. Call this the yes, I'm a S trafficker, but I didn't use chains defense. When Maxwell claimed that she did not create child CP and that the government knew she didn't, Siggy quipped, call this the until you find the photos, I'm innocent defense. And when Maxwell asserted that she did not act as a madame for Epstein, Siggy responded that the gist of Maxwell's argument seems to be that defendant believes trafficking one girl to Epstein does not a madam make. Call this the yes, I was Virginia's madame, but no one else's defense. I mean, there was literally hundreds of girls going in and out of there. Like, he was having to relieve himself, pleasure himself, sorry. Like, was it 5 times a day? In his own words. In his own words. That's what he said. That was his excuse. In conclusion, Siggy wrote that if Maxwell was involved in my abuse, as we were arguing, then her January 2015 statement accusing me of obvious lies was defamatory. Siggy asked the court to deny Maxwell's motion for summary judgment, and on March 22nd, 2017, Judge Robert W. Sweet did exactly that. Trial was set for May 15th. The next few months were a frenzy of activity. Siggy and Brad and Paul were furiously preparing for trial, wrangling countless witnesses and putting more than 1,000 exhibits in order. They booked us all hotel rooms for the 4 weeks they thought the trial would take, as well as a large war room across the street from the courthouse. And they scheduled the final deposition they needed, a third grilling of Maxwell, because she had refused to answer certain questions in her previous depositions. This one was going to take place in the courtroom, with the judge as a referee a week before the trial. By this point, a few settlement discussions had been held and gone nowhere. My lawyers believed we were headed to trial. Still, I flew in a few weeks beforehand for a final mediation, scheduled for May 3rd, which David Boyce and Brad's then partner, Stan Pottinger, were handling, since Brad and Siggy and Paul were so swamped with trial prep. A few days later, on the eve of Maxwell's final deposition, my team and I agreed to settle, and a few weeks after that, the case was dismissed. I am not allowed to discuss the terms of the settlement, as they are confidential, but I can talk about why I settled. We'd prepared so diligently to expose Maxwell's lies in open court, and it would have been deeply satisfying to watch her squirm. I also would have loved to watch Epstein be called to the stand, as my lawyers had planned. Even if he'd taken the fifth as he'd done before, it would have done me good to see him interrogated like the criminal he was. But remember, this was a civil case, not a criminal one. There was never going to be an outcome that sent Maxwell to jail, at least not directly. In the end, if we'd taken it to trial and won, the victory was always going to be about money. For me, the settlement meant I could return to my family sooner than I'd planned, and I looked forward to using my payout to take care of them. I was not the first Epstein victim to be criticized for settling, and I would not be the last. But to those who think less of me for doing so, I'd ask you to remember the devastatingly accurate assertion I'd made in my first lawsuit, Jane Doe 102 versus Jeffrey Epstein, The one that said I'd permanently suffered not only loss of income, but a loss of the capacity to enjoy life. Maxwell and Epstein had stolen something precious from me. Sometimes I could rise above that loss, but other times, even still, I could not. Financially, my family had struggled. While I would have liked to re-enter the workforce, I felt as if I were unemployable. I mean, especially once you start getting harassed by paparazzi, I don't see how you're going to be able to have a normal job. At times, I grew so desperate to explain my spotty work history during the years I was trafficked that I made up fake jobs and employers to list on my resume. All anyone had to do was Google my name to know who I was. As I'd said in one of my depositions, no one wants to hire a slave. Meanwhile, as I've said, ongoing threats to my family's safety meant that more and more Robbie felt he could no longer work outside the home, especially since I'd sued Maxwell. The paparazzi were back, circling our family like vultures, and he felt he needed to deliver the kids to and from school each day. In the end, there was this. For months now, preparing for trial had been my primary occupation. Motherhood had taken a back seat, and that had cost me in ways that are difficult to quantify. During the first half of 2017, I'd been distracted at best and at worst absent. I never missed a birthday or holiday, but anyone who's a parent will understand that I often went without something much more important. The day-to-day mundane moments that make up a mother's life, pouring bubbles in the kids' baths, making sure homework preceded playtime, even having simple arguments. No, Alex, you may not race around our neighbourhood at night in a souped-up go-kart. Only because I had a great husband and understanding in-laws, the wheels had not fallen off the bus. That was the Guiffre household. When Maxwell defamed me, she'd eroded my credibility and thus my ability to help other victims. If I could use some of her money to help me to heal, to let me focus on my kids, and to fuel my attempts to do good, then I was happy to take it. Yeah. Get that bag. And I think she made a good decision, because historically we have that deposition, which I began the video with. So I started the video reading out a different part of that deposition and comparing it to some of the Epstein emails that have just been revealed for anyone who is late to the video. Or the live stream, I should say. It's not a video yet. Good night to good night to Austin, and good night to everyone else that is watching. Thank you for joining me. I will be back soon. We are getting nearer to the end. Let me just, once again, I like to do this. That's the book I'm reading. I recommend it to everybody. Yeah, like I said, I think we're probably only going to be doing another couple more readings and then we'll be at the end. But I definitely feel like there's a lot to talk about. So who knows where this is going to go. Anyway, like I said, I hope you all have a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you for joining. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already.